We have to start with Donald Trump Jr. What is the talk down there right now?
It's pretty ridiculous. I was at a lunch today at a restaurant that's a pretty big hotspot for politicians, and you could hear at every single table. It was all anybody was talking about. Everybody is kind of flummoxed, not only because of the news, but A, because this seems like a smoking gun, if there's such a thing as a smoking gun anymore, and B, when Don Jr. actually released the emails on Twitter to suggest that they inoculated him from any kind of charge, and they're actually evidence of collusion. So the whole thing's a little bit unclear.
So as the speculation that he thought by releasing the emails that somehow he would get cover?
Well, I think two things happened. The first was it became clear that the New York Times had the emails and was going to release them, so he figured if he preempted it would be a little bit better. But second, he doesn't seem to think there's anything damning in the emails. Yet the emails make it clear that, first of all, this meeting was taking place at least on behalf of or in association with the Russian government. And B, it seems like the relationship between the Russian government and the Trump campaign had already existed. And Donald Trump Jr. seems to have ignored that altogether.
And so talk a little bit, let's talk about the contents of the email here. And actually, one of the things that I'd come across today, Donald Trump Jr. clearly has attorneys, a criminal defense attorney on his team?
Yeah, I mean, there are questions as to whether there was criminal wrongdoing and whether he actually broke the law. And that happens on several different fronts involved here. The first is, if a foreign government tries to influence or collude in an election or provide evidence that could help you take down an opponent, are you legally bound to report that information to the FBI? The norm certainly is that, yes, you do something like that if you get information from an opposing campaign that could hurt them. But he didn't seem to do that. The second is who knew what and when. We know that Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort were made aware of the meeting, that they attended the meeting. We don't know whether Donald Trump himself knew. So that's going to be a little bit tricky as well, because as long as they can keep Donald Trump out of this circle of knowledge, that protects the president.
And, you see the speculation by some, maybe even apologists, if you will, that say it's a campaign. Who hasn't been told that they might have information on your opponent that you might want to meet with them? Where does the line get crossed?
Well, I think the line gets crossed when it's an email from a foreign national talking about a foreign government having information that can help take down an opponent, and calling that takedown part of a longer-term campaign on the part of that government. Now, if it's just Joe Schmo in the United States saying, hey, look, I have some information that I think can take down Hillary Clinton, fine, meet with that person. If it turns out that the information is damning, you can use it. If it turns out that it's not, you can dismiss it. This is very, very different on that front. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Trump administration and the various Trump surrogates during the campaign keep forgetting the meetings they've had with Russians. And this is yet one more meeting where Kushner, Manafort, and Donald Trump Jr. seem originally to have forgotten that it took place, when the email exchanges suggest that it actually took a while to set it up.
Do you expect to hear from Donald Trump Jr.? Is he not meeting with Sean Hannity this evening? Did I see that as well?
I don't know. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the course of the next hour or two, some of those plans might be changed a little bit, because at this point, the White House is obviously fully involved. Donald Trump released a statement, saying that his son is a great person and has the utmost levels of integrity. Clearly, the White House is moving into crisis mode.
Is there any sort of cover, again, for someone who doesn't come from the political world, has always worked with his father in the business world, to be like, I didn't know I couldn't talk to someone from the Russian government? Is that an excuse?
It's an excuse. Whether it's a valid excuse is a different question. However, it seems like he knew that it was relevant enough to CC Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, right? So it's very difficult to play the I didn't know, I'm so naive to this game, when you actually know exactly who to identify as rightful recipients of this information, because they could use it in the campaign. The fact that Donald Trump Jr. also said, oh, I hope this information is true. If it is, I love it, and let's release it at the end of the summer, suggests that there's some motive behind what he was actually planning to do as well.
And, talking about Kushner and Manafort, apparently the revelation was that they did receive the email from Donald Trump Jr. I mean, did they have cover? I just never read it. I mean, again, is it all going to, will we see an investigation into this, and how soon?
Well, my understanding is that if they say they never read the email, it becomes a little bit unclear as to how they showed up at the meeting then. Because the email was what told them that they were going to be meeting that day at 3 o'clock, and then that was changed to 4 o'clock. And if they showed up at 4 o'clock and they did disclose that meeting, the not reading excuse becomes a little bit more invalid. There's no question that today was a busy day for Bob Mueller, that today was a busy day for the Senate Intelligence Committee. I just think this is going nowhere. This is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But it's more ammunition for those that are concerned that maybe enough is enough.
And you said being at a popular restaurant with political folks down in D.C. today, and that's all anyone was talking about. Does this take the oxygen out of the room for anything else, for healthcare? I mean, is it just the focus of what's going on inside the Beltway, at least today and this week?
It's certainly today and probably tomorrow. I don't know what the staying power will be. A lot of it will probably come down to what else the New York Times finds out and what they're able to release. This could ironically be good news for Mitch McConnell, though, because he called off the first 2 weeks of summer recess. The Senate is sticking around D.C. to try and work out this health care bill. With all eyes off of them, he might be able to strike some more compromises, and he might actually be able to push this through. Now, the Republicans, of course, have decreased incentives to give Donald Trump a win right now because it's a little bit unclear what the future of the administration is going to be given these other revelations.
And there had been speculation about, as we talked about, calling off a portion of the August recess. Were you surprised that he ultimately played that card?
I wasn't that surprised because we saw over the 4th of July various senators going back to their states being met with quite a bit of vitriol at town hall meetings regarding the inability to do anything regarding health care. So 2 weeks ago, maybe this would have seemed somewhat stunning. After we saw how they were treated both by Democratic and Republican constituents, it seemed pretty clear that they need to at least try to get something done.
So healthcare is on the table. Of course, all focus right now on Donald Trump Jr. One of the things I did bring to your attention today that we reported on here, and I just want to pull it up so I can get the language, the Morning Consult survey about senators and their popularity. I know we discussed it briefly prior. The Morning Consult has been in the news before about what they put out, but in this lack of information, what do you have to say about these numbers showing Sheldon Whitehouse's approval ratings being below 50%?
I think there's nothing to it. I tried to read about the methodology, and they're very, very vague. We know that it's a very large national survey, but what struck me was that Rhode Island and Delaware, which are two very blue, very Democratic states, were the two states that are also the smallest and that saw the biggest shift, which leads me to believe that we're talking about a pretty small sample size and a pretty large margin of error. So if I was Sheldon Whitehouse, if I was Jack Reed, I would not put much stake or stock in these results.
And as someone pointed out, we had put the piece up and they pointed out that back in the day, David Cicilline had a 12% approval rating and yet still won the seat for Congress. Do approval ratings translate into electoral success or defeat?
I think they provide a good gauge of whether somebody is on the right track or the wrong track, but until there's a campaign, they don't really matter, right? There's nothing to suggest that this poll is going to lead Sheldon Whitehouse to decide that he's going to throw in the towel and not seek re-election. The other thing that I remember that I think is relevant here is, Lincoln Chafee's approval rating in 2006 was well above 50% on election day, and he lost to Sheldon Whitehouse. Because the political dynamics of re-electing a Republican when the Democrats had the opportunity to take control of the Senate was just too much to bear. So in addition to the individual approval ratings, there are also broader macro dynamics at stake. And I just don't put much in this poll.
And as you're always quoted so often in national press, I did want to bring up the issue, the sleeveless gate, if you will. I see that you I see that you're sleeveless. Could you, you basically, to paraphrase, said, here we are, it's 2017, kind of things have changed since back in the day. Again, much ado about nothing.
Well, I think it's much ado about something if the Democrats are able to use this as one more example of how Paul Ryan and the Republicans seem out of touch when it comes to women's roles in society and how they've evolved. What has struck me about this entire sleeveless gate situation is that nobody is suggesting that female reporters or anybody in the Capitol is dressing provocatively or inappropriately. It's simply that it's 95 degrees and humid outside and they're not wearing jackets. right? So the idea that we haven't gotten to the point in society where women can actually show their arms without men being so tempted and taunted is somewhat ridiculous. If the Democrats can, in a list of 25 things, highlight that this is just one more way that the Republicans seem stuck in a previous time period, it might be useful. In and of itself, I don't think it means much.
So you're back. You're back in action. You've got a lot on your plate down there. What do you have on tap for the next couple of weeks, Jennifer?
I am trying to get as much work done as I possibly can before the semester starts, because once I start teaching, research takes a backseat to everything else. So right now we are finishing up a textbook on women, men, and U.S. politics that'll be out at the end of August, and we're just finishing up the page proofs for that and trying to figure out the next big book project.
Fantastic. And will that textbook be used this fall at American University?
It will be, and I hope that it'll also be used at every other university around the country.
Well, once that's finished, we'll put that up there. It's always a pleasure talking with you, Jennifer, getting the inside the Beltway take down there from American University. It was all Donald Trump Jr. all day today. So I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what next week holds, but we appreciate, as always, your Skyping into the Navigant Credit Union broadcast.